Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for the NBA and NHL playoffs this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds while the games are being played. When the game's over, head to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to betonline.ag today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Don't forget, use our promo code BELIEVE, that's B-L-E-A-V, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. Are you looking for a higher potential return on your savings? Turn to our sponsor, Save. As an SEC-registered investment advisor, Save safely combines the best parts of saving and investing with its Market Savings program. Market Savings is a savings product that provides you with market returns instead of interest. The returns come from diversified investment portfolios based on your individual investment profile. The return from the investments is paid to you at the end of the selected investment term. But investing comes with risk, right? Well, with Save, your deposit is FDIC insured and never used for any investments. The current variable APYs are 9.07% for the one-year product and 7.9% for the five-year product. So what does this cost you? Well, Save only charges a fee when your investments make you money. To learn more or to sign up, visit www.joinsave.com/state. That's joinsave.com/state. The link to the website is in the description of this podcast. State of State invites you to join Save. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Joining us today on State of State, he is the fantastic Mike Poorman of statecollege.com. I have a soft spot in my heart for Mike. We've had him on here before, and he is the perfect person to bring on in lieu of the news that went down today in regards to Beaver Stadium's approved new renovations. The renovations were already ongoing, and now a new plan for close to $700 million has been approved by the Penn State Board of Trustees by a vote of 26-2 with 3 abstentions. The thing I want to start off with first, and I think this is the normal human reaction, Mike, is that the pictures, the illustrations that on gopsusports.com were said were strictly for illustration use only. However, it makes Beaver Stadium look very futuristic, very much something that you would see in a modern stadium or a modern NFL stadium even. And for a while, the conversations that I've had with you, with Spider as well in the past, talking about what this could be, is that there were a lot of people saying this would be reminiscent of what Texas A&M did with Kyle Field, in that it would be torn down and right next to it, a similar looking structure will be built in its place, but with modern guts. This seems different, and obviously people got a little thrown off by the pictures. Can you give us a little bit more detail?
Yeah, that's a great point. As we communicated beforehand, that was really the only exterior shot among everything they've shared. And it is interesting, though. They do say, for illustrative purposes only, but then it's the image that Penn State sends out. It's a far cry from 7 years ago when Sandy Barber and Phil Eston and Populous, Scott Radisek, had renderings of a brick facade. Yes. I think that's in our mind of what that was going to be. I wouldn't get too hung up on that, although it is interesting. Part of the plans they revealed today on the west side of the stadium, the side that the press box is on, at the lower level where the entrance is for the press box and right now the ADA, the plans that they show a 21,000 square foot welcome center. primarily, and also for events, but primarily twofold. And maybe you were, Tom Hannafin, and I'm contractually obligated to mention this, that when we had class together in sports writing as a broadcaster, you were a fantastic sports writer. I don't want your listeners to forget that you're a hardcore journalist. So there you go, man.
It's on my wall, and pro wrestling has not used any of that degree.
Well, I don't know if you did for your official visit on campus as a student, not an athlete, but you went through Shields.
Yes.
And Shields is aged in many ways, more aged than Beaver Stadium. And then where the Penn State Athletic Administration building now is, where Pat Kraft is at, and his senior staff is next to the meat processing lab at the corner right by the stadium. That used to be the Center County Visitors Bureau. Mm-hmm. So I'm going a long way down a rabbit hole here, but the new thing on the west side that they partially showed was as far as a welcome center for all of Penn State that would replace the Shields part, and then also in many ways replace what had been the Visitors Bureau. I don't think it's going to look like that. I think, and you're tuned to this, I think as much as there's going to be changes, I think folks are Penn State are traditionalists. So you may see a combination of that and what's there and the brick and mortar they showed in 2017. But the rent they admitted this today. All along they don't have real renderings of the thing. They're looking to bring it up to code, do the mechanical, winterize lights, put the new scoreboard in, and get all that done ASAP before the 2024 season. And they, in that sense, they weren't putting the cart before the horse as far as designing it until they got the $664 million approved by the Board of Trustees today.
I want to come back to the vote itself. 26-2 was the vote. 3 abstentions, as I mentioned. Anthony Lebrano and Barry Fenchak voted no. Jay Paterno was one of the 3 who abstained. Jay Paterno citing a conflict of interest because of a, quote, public-private partnership proposal that could have brought $150 to $200 million to the renovation plan that Penn State chose not to pursue. Is there any light that you're able to shed on what Jay Paterno is referring to, or is it simply the fact that the Paterno family obviously is very close to anything going on with Penn State and Beaver Stadium?
No, there's a couple things for a little bit of context, and I think this is cool. I had a meeting the other day about the Nittany Lion Inn. What they're going to do there is very cool. It's going to open up the beginning of September, and that's a private-public partnership. The folks who own the Scholar and the Hyatt downtown are renovating and going to be managing the Nittany Lion Inn and the Penn Stater for 99 years. So Penn State's all on board, and I think that's actually really good, and I'm excited by what they've shown they're going to do with the Nittany Lion Inn. Not to speak out of turn or share more than I know, but they did share at the meeting that Jay had discussions at the highest levels with Penn State about some sort of public-private partnership for the stadium. And I think it was Jay rather than the whole stadium, with partners about creating some ventures as part of the stadium and ameliorating $100 or $200 million of costs for the stadium. And so I'm not talking out of school. They referenced that today. Jay acknowledged it when he said that because of those discussions, and they didn't come to fruition as far as being part of this proposal, that he did recuse himself. And I think that was the only prudent thing to do at that point, to not be part of the vote.
Now, Jay has landed in a more traditionalist sense, some of the older thought processes of Penn State fans, and I think the Penn State Board of Trustees, and some issues here and there, some votes that have come up where there have been opportunities for progress. He has not always been on the side of that, so I think that's a natural point to bring up in regard to this vote. And then also I want to bring forward Anthony Lebrano, who voted no, another person who necessarily hasn't been on the right side of progress in this whole thing. had raised a point about one trying to delay this vote until July, which obviously the vote's happened. It's been passed. But there's a quote from Anthony Lebrano in the past that says, "There's no question Beaver Stadium needs a facelift. The only question is what that facelift looks like and how much we need to spend." I think the word facelift is a terrible choice of words, because if your thought was to just put a nice coat of paint on a very old stadium and that ought to do it. Anybody who's been in Beaver Stadium, as much as I love it, and it is our Mecca, the building is very, very old and absolutely needs upgrades, a total gut job, so to speak. I would love for the aesthetic to remain the same, but to do a facelift, I think would be pointless. So it sounds like somebody maybe hung up too much on the aesthetics, and then you see those illustrations and renderings go out. And that's where the miscommunication comes in this whole situation, is that, yes, this is a positive, not only for the football program, the stadium itself, but the entire Penn State community and the entirety of all 31 sports having the opportunity to benefit from this. So it concerns me to continue to hear these little inklings of members of the board of trustees, new and old, that are standing in the back and pulling things down as opposed to pushing things forward. And a great quote from Brandon Short, who referenced Joe Paterno, is that I'm paraphrasing here, but saying that if you're not changing, then you're falling behind. And these are the things that Joe believed in. So just because this was the way that Beaver Stadium and Penn State was, doesn't mean it always has to be that way. So for me, this feels like progress. What did you think?
Well, yeah, I think that may be a long ago quote. I think that was not, if that's what he meant, then I agree with everything you said. A couple things. One, a trustee asked, and Sarah Thorndike, who's head of finance for Penn State and is really the lead finance person on this project, basically the $664 million plus the 70 they already spent. I think it's going to be those two together, as opposed to 664 minus 70. They weren't clear, but 1/3 is for maintenance, up to code, upkeep that had not been done for years and years and years. I think that's evident to everyone, whether you're sitting at the highest high or you're walking in the concourse, or you're, trying to take a pee in a trough there. I mean, so they're saying 1/3 is that. A third is, I don't want to say amenities, but 24 more elevators, 12 escalators, 4 stairwells, 102 more concession stands, better circulation movement in and out of the stadium and inside the station, all those things that have to happen anyway. So you're really looking at 2 steps there. And then the third step was over 50 new suites on the west side, over 4,500 new high-end club seats, loge box seats, which are those ground level jobbies that I've been to SoFi, I've been to AT&T, and those are the ground level high-end big hitter with restaurant behind. So it's
the Peach Bowl and Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta. Yeah. They're fantastic.
Yeah, all the big state-of-the-art stadiums. And so it's a third. And the last third with those seats, that's how you're going to pay for the other 2/3. You got to you got to bring it up to code and everything. So that's really it. I don't want to speak for Anthony, but this is what I prefer. They had said in one of the slide presentations they mentioned today on the public call that they don't have to make a decision until July 10, as far as keeping things on track and not accruing extra cost. They mentioned again today, if you push this back a year, it's another $40 million, which is certainly understandable. I think Anthony's point was, let's take a little more time. And we have more questions about the dollars, the cents, the debt service, and then things like, and Penn State, Sarah Thorndike, I think she was one, acknowledged that they, and this is pretty cool, I think they've acknowledged that they have labor costs based on, the bring in the NIL. And so I think Penn State has done that. I think that he just wanted a little more peek behind the curtain as far as what those numbers are. But he even said he knows it needs to be done. But I think if you look at the project as a third, then it makes total sense that way.
To clarify that quote from Brandon Short, because I was paraphrasing, he said, quote, Joe Paterno used to say, you either get better or get worse. You don't stay the same. So love to hear that. I think that's the perfect way to phrase the way Penn State is trying to move forward while honoring the past, but looking to the future. Overall, you mentioned all the upgrades in terms of suites, lodge boxes, etc. Do you think there will be more of a corporate and business type feel to Beaver Stadium? Because I think the way I always feel about the Penn State fan base is it is very blue collar. If you look throughout central Pennsylvania, it's people who bust their butts and they spend a lot of money to make sure they can make it to a game or two a year. Adding a more corporate element, yes, you're going to bring in those dollars, but do you think that's a positive change altogether for Penn State?
Well, I think it's inevitable. The Penn State crowd has been, Huntington, which well, Bradford, Bedford, Sealands, Grove, Scranton. So when you're taking those, everything's happening on the west end, on the west side. Mm-hmm. Nothing's changing on north. Nothing's changing on south. They're not adding, subtracting on the east. So west, which had been the home of the longtime ticket holders, it's a great spot. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the faculty staff tickets are on that side. So if you're going to put in 58 suites and boxes and you're going to put in 4,500 club seats, you're displacing, if not removing, those hardcore Joe, Sally, Tom, and Mary people. And I wrote this the other day. Yeah, it's going to impact the atmosphere some because you're going to be sitting in the box or in the loge box or whatever. It's not going to be quite as ruckus. I don't know what they're going to do with the student tickets, but I hope they don't touch those.
I certainly hope not, and I think that's been part of the issue for Penn State fans in this entire NIL era, and making renovations to the stadium, how the team is spending, how the athletic department is spending, the university is spending, is that it all comes back to, it's like, well, how much more is this going to cost the average fan? I think that's certainly something that people worry about. And then the natural question after that is like, okay, does this get us closer to winning on the field? And the long answer is yes, it feels like.
Yeah, it doesn't get you, I mean, to use Brandon's quote, it doesn't get you farther away. It keeps the coffers, the money coming in. It's going to be and is, Joel Klatt last week just, said it's the toughest atmosphere in the Big Ten, number 2 overall. I think we all agree with that. So I don't think it's going to put them farther away. And if it puts them closer, then, that's great. I mean, Penn State is 2 games away. They're 2 games away. So will this make a difference in one of those games as far as revenue generated to once paying players comes in-house? Yeah. Will it continue to create that home field advantage? Those type of things, yeah. So it's a great question, though, Tom, is how many wins does it translate to? If it's a half a win, then they're only a game and a half away,
Yeah, Penn State continues to be on the doorstep, so to speak, but this is a necessary change altogether within the Penn State football community. This place that we all love and cherish needs some TLC. So I'm very happy to hear that this is in progress, and I believe is expected to be completed by 2027. So this is something in the relatively near future in the grand scheme of things. Also spoken about at the meeting today, and that's been spoken about quite a bit as of late, is trying to further monetize Beaver Stadium. And we've seen examples of that very recently. Luke Combs put 80,000 people in the stadium for a country concert, and it wouldn't be the first thing that has gone into Beaver Stadium that wasn't football. In what you've heard and the discussions you've had, what other events, sports, you name it, would we possibly expect to wind up in Beaver Stadium?
Great question. It's funny. Pat Kraft, who I like a lot, he has a lot of enthusiasm. He brings a lot of people into the tent. And he has 3 sports degrees. He's Dr. Kraft in sports. So, but when Pat mentioned this, he answered your question in 2 ways. He said, continue to have big name concerts. And he said in international soccer games, which is kind of cool, is I did some research for the story this week, and Michigan in the Big House has had 2 international friendlies in their time over 100,000 people. Michigan has had 100,000 fans for a college hockey game. They've had 100,000 fans for an NHL game. I think this is really cool. I don't know if you saw Nebraska women's volleyball had
Yes.
92,003 fans for their game in September. And for me, there's always a Penn State angle. On that team was Caroline Juravicius, Joe's
Oh, that's wonderful.
and she has since transferred to Penn State. And she's the epitome of a Penn State, a great student athlete, but she was in that atmosphere. And then you look at wrestling. Iowa has had, and Carter Starachi kind of gave us a little push in that direction. But Iowa had 44,000 in 50-degree weather, and I believe it was October, for an outdoor wrestling match the morning of a night game. Rutgers, God love them, had 42,000 in 62-degree weather in November at their home stadium the morning of a night game. So, yeah, and I got to tell you, I'm all in for all of those.
I would love to see a stadium series game from the NHL. I think Penguins and Flyers makes way too much sense. A neutral site NFL game, I think, as well. It's the challenging part about State College is that you're committing to basically a 3-hour drive from Philadelphia, roughly 2 hours from Pittsburgh. So it's a little bit more out of the way than, for instance, like an Ann Arbor than Detroit. Me, having worked in professional wrestling for 12 years, I was like, well, pro wrestling in that stadium, I think, can make a lot of sense. And oh, by the way, one of the fastest rising stars in UFC right now is Penn State alumnus Bo Nickel. So there's just all these really cool opportunities that, yes, if you're putting this money into the stadium, put other sports in there. This is not necessarily the Joe Paterno era where only the football can operate on that field. Concerts, events, sports, you name it. Yes, let's utilize this, because if all 31 sports are going to benefit, fantastic. And if it gets the Penn State football program closer to being able to compete in the NIL space more than they are right now, which you and I both know are a far cry from the top of the Big Ten at the moment, unfortunately, I'm all for this stuff. It's just kind of breaking some of the traditional conservative thinking that I think exists organically within the community, but that progress has to happen.
Well, I think the it's going to be a tough sell in some ways, because, for what you said, Penn State's anchored in the middle of the state, so selling 58 more suites is not going to be easy. But when you get a suite, you can watch. You already have a spot for Man U. You already have a spot for Taylor Swift comes back to her home state. You already have a spot for Penn State versus Oklahoma State in wrestling, right? So I think that those are all not only going to be revenue generators from ticket sales, but I think they're going to be enhancements and bells and whistles to sell the new suites too.
I will say this: I saw some detailing in terms of updating concessions and amenities. If they get rid of the chicken basket and they change the type of hot dogs, and if they get rid of the hot chocolate and the collectible mug, I'm going to scream and strangle people left and right. These are things that I refuse to see change, unfortunately, within Beaver Stadium.
No, I think they get that. It'll be an interesting blend, a blend in old new. But you said this earlier. I think actually to open it up in 2027,
it's ambitious,
pretty quick, right? That's pretty quick.
It's quick, it's ambitious, and granted, a lot of this work has already started within the last few years, so it's just piling on top of this. Yes, when you see $700 million, that is an enormous figure. So it all feels very positive to me. I do continue to come back to that gap within the NIL space between Penn State and the top of the Big Ten. A lot of metrics have been put out about it recently in terms of now with the new Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan, USC, and Oregon outspending Penn State in regard to their football programs. And again, you see all these efforts by Happy Valley United and other entities trying to bring more revenue to the football program. So this is a step in the right direction, hopefully. And if we're lucky, the winterization process that has been attempted, at least this past year, in the hopes of hosting a college football playoff game, I feel like that might be ambitious in and of itself, to use that word once again. But you never know. At least we're moving in the right direction.
Well, they're planning on it. You guys. I may have missed this, even though I'm an avid listener of your pod. They moved December graduation from a Saturday to a Sunday to open up stadium for potential hosting. Now you'd have to finish 5th through 8th in the end of the regular season CFP top 12, but they're planning on it. I think to go back to the NFL game or the big events, and it's interesting because the final official attendance was 73 and change. That this area needs more hotel rooms. It has 2,500 to 3,500, and so I think that is part of it as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of things within the community that can be upgraded, I think, to make it a little bit easier of an experience for Penn State football fans altogether. But hopefully it's moving things in the right direction. And with that date for graduation, then that means professors like you can, just crack the whip a little bit less than you have for years. Just be kind. Really
I was benevolent, wasn't I?
Mike, thank you so much for shedding some light on this. Check out Mike Poorman on statecollege.com. He does some spectacular work. His All 22 series is absolutely outstanding. Can you give us a little bit of a preview, a little sneak peek into what your latest All 22 has been all about?
Yeah, it previewed the stadium, and it kind of laid out what was going to happen today, and I got a lot of the numbers and figures and what was going to happen. Right. I mean, they didn't talk about 58 suites, but I'd know that some things like that. But I appreciate it. I do want to leave you with this, is that on the west side, it's going to be a challenge in 25, 26. There's going to be temporary bleachers. So that's a little bit of a leave behind, but I think it's a small price to pay for the future.
That's where my family's tickets are. So we'll see how that goes. Mike, thank you so much for joining me here on State of State. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Take care. Good seeing you, bud.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, let us know what you think of the show on social media, and check out all of our content on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Search for the handle @StateOfStatePod. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.